Hi, everyone. Um, we are live on Rabbi Farhi goes live on Thursday night, and tonight's topic is You Are the Storyteller. I wanted to speak about a very powerful element that takes place in the story in Parashat Shemot. And I have to say, it's something very special because it speaks directly to one of the most powerful things that human beings do. We tell stories. We tell stories to be able to explain the way that we're feeling. We tell stories to be able to sell products. We tell stories for so many different reasons. And in order to understand how we tell stories, I wanted to look a little bit at something that happens in the parasha this week, and maybe you'll kind of understand where I'm coming from. I'm just going to turn this around. Sorry, give me 1 second. There we go. Let's begin. The first story that we hear in this week's parsha is a story that takes place when the Jewish people are leaving the land of Egypt. A man comes to his people, the Pharaoh, and he says to everybody, "Hi guys, good to see you all. Shabnam, Alex, Joseph, Daniela, Yael. Oh my gosh, Daniela, so nice. Lauren, so good to see you guys. If you guys would all want to..." Sorry, just got a phone call. We'd love it if you'd share it as well while we're speaking, so everyone can kind of join in too. But Paro is the most amazing storyteller. He gathers people around and says to them, we need to get rid of these people. There's a story here that he's selling them. Everything that we have, everything that we own, all of our goods, everything that we've developed is being stolen by these people, these Jews, these foreigners, these immigrants. This storytelling ability causes Pharaoh to become so powerful that he manages to get everybody in his kingdom to share the story with everybody else. And very soon, everybody is bought into the narrative. We don't have to go back that long in history when we find someone else who did it to perfection. Hitler manages to be able to convince all of the people to find this terrible rabbit hole in thinking that the Jewish people are the scourge of the earth. They need to be wiped out. This unbelievable lie is so big, it's so broad, that actually, if you tell it enough times, people start to believe it. And he comes up with a plan. And his plan is to save the Jews, to get rid of the Jews, to enslave them, and to force them into servitude. What's so crazy is to think about the fact that if you look in the Torah, the very first time the Jewish people are called a nation is in the very same speech when Pharaoh says that there's a people, and he calls them a people for the first time. They've been a family up until this point, but the second they're called a nation, in the same sentence, immediately what happens is that someone's trying to deal with this problem, to give a solution to this problem. But this is not something which is limited to the difficult, if you will, the difficult narrative that Paro is trying to sell. I put my daughter a little while ago. I put my son to sleep, and I have a custom when I put my son to sleep. So we have a thing that we do, myself, and I've done it as well with my daughter, and that is that I tell them a bedtime story, but I record all the bedtime stories that I tell. And I tell them stories about animals, I tell them stories, but all giving messages, and I record them. That way, if Abba has to go away, the kids can have, my wife has it on her phone, she can put Yitzchak to sleep, or my daughter Sarah to sleep, and they can have a story from their Abba, putting them to sleep, even if I'm not there with them. And what's interesting is, I've told stories over the year of elephants. I've told stories about cheetahs. I've told stories about kings. I've told stories about princes. I've told stories about soldiers. And every time I ask my son, "What's the name of the giraffe?" His answer is, "It's Yitzchak." Tell me a story about a soldier. Well, what's a soldier's name? The soldier's name is Yitzchak. The name of every story is always Yitzchak. Because the human being has the capacity to do that with stories. We overlay our own experience on top of a story that we're hearing, that we're learning, and we imagine ourselves in that story. It's what the Haggadah asks of us. It says that the story of leaving Egypt is so important to the continuity of the Jewish people that we want you to imagine as if you've been there, as if you yourself have left. But it's not just the story that Paro tells in the initial beginning of our story. How are you, Rafal? Congratulations on your beautiful simcha, on your baby girl. So nice to have another beautiful niece to add to the wonderful Farhi family. Mabruk Mazal Tov. You should raise her in the most fantastic way. Okay. But stories are not only about narratives that a pharaoh can spin to his people. It's also about the story that we can tell ourselves. You know, Moshe is a man who's going to God and he's telling him that he's not a leader. He's not the person. Give someone else this job. He's convincing God that he's not the man for the job. He can't lead the Jewish people. By the end, he's too weak. He's not persuasive. He doesn't have he can't speak so well. He's kvad peh. By the end of the same parasha that tells us about Moshe, who's an unsure leader, lacking confidence, we find him arguing with God himself. God, you promised. You said you were going to take them out. How come you haven't done so? From the time that you told me you were going to take them out, you know, it's gotten worse for them. This ability that we have to be able to sell ourselves what we can and can't do, paint ourselves into any story, is one of the most powerful concepts that we can use, either to our advantage or to our disadvantage. We can paint ourselves into the ineffectual victim of a story, and then nothing that happens will allow us to see outside of the nature of that victimhood. We will always be the person that people could take advantage of. We will always be the person that's getting dealt the short hand. We will always be that person. Or we can paint ourselves as the hero of the story, the Yitzchak, who is a lion, who is a prince, who is a soldier, because it's all about my understanding of myself through these various lenses, through the prism of so many stories. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to end with one idea, and I'd like to end this one idea and offer you a challenge with this as well for our late night learning for this week. And that is as follows. I know that on Friday there's going to be an inauguration ceremony, and in it, a man that so many people hate and so many people love, ironically. No one can understand, neither can understand how the other person could begin to hate such a man. He's clearly the Mashiach. He's going to save America. Are you absolutely crazy? You know, the sides can't even begin to have a conversation. But tomorrow is going to be the inauguration of that man, of Donald Trump, to be the president of the United States. The story that people are whining through now, that America is done, that we're all moving to another country. That's a story that we're painting for ourselves. Whether or not the leader of the country is someone that you approve of or not, you have your part to play for the country. We spoke the other week about how Jacob is a man who is the antithesis of Egypt. And yet when he dies, everyone in Egypt is mourning his passing because he's someone that made a difference to a country, to a group of people that are so unlike him. If the person that's standing for office on Friday that's going to be sworn in to be the president-elect is someone you don't like, do something about it. I'm not telling you to run for president. Maybe that's not something that's on your agenda. But leading people doesn't only happen from an office, and quite often it's the last place that it happens from. If you have an opportunity to be able to do something or to be a moaner, paint yourself as the hero of the story. We talk about visualization as a technique in self-help. If you could imagine yourself asking for a raise, if you could imagine yourself asking someone for a date, if you could imagine asking yourself for someone to marry you, then actually when it comes time to do it, you can do it because you've seen yourself do that already in your mind's eye. You've painted this powerful story, and once it's been told already, you know the story, you know how it ends, and you have the confidence to see it through. The amazing thing about the word story in Hebrew is sipur. We say on the night of Passover, every single year, mitzvah alenu, it's a mitzvah on us, to lisaper, to tell over the story of Egypt. What's the difference between telling over that we left Egypt and telling the story? The nature of the difference is in the details. Visualization techniques work when a person can see not just themselves asking for the raise, but they can see their boss sitting there, the smirk on their face. They can see what the room looks like. They can visualize everything so that when they walk in, they've really been there. There are two ways to be able to have experience. One way is to actually have the experience. The other way, again, it's amazing, but it works. And studies show that if you could see yourself in that experience, then it's almost as if, it's not the same, but it's almost as if you have that experience. It's why I believe Jewish law teaches that it's so important all the time to talk about Mashiach, to talk about this perfect world that's going to come. We have to remind ourselves every day, think about Mashiach, a perfect world, a world that doesn't exist in thinking about self. It's all about, the kingdom of God, so to speak, which is all about a world which is perfect, where there's no war, where there's no selfishness. This concept, which is the perfect Jewish world, if you talk about it every day, then you could possibly see it happening. And if you could see it happening, then you could take a step towards it. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to ask you to think for 1 second before Shabbat begins about something that you would wish to have in your life. And I'd like to ask you to tell a beautiful story, not to anybody else, not to Facebook Live, but to yourself. To say to yourself, these Jews, they're a problem. These Jews, they're a problem. These Jews, they're a problem. Everyone believes they're a problem. But if you told yourself a different story, I am capable. If you told yourself that there's something that I really want to do with myself, I want to be able to speak in a way which is positive. I want to be able to build people up and not tear them down. I want to be a better person, a better friend, a more trusted advisor. I want to be someone who people can rely on. I want to earn trust. I want to earn respect. I want to be a better son or brother or sister, or whatever it is that you want to be. And you could see yourself in that and say, what is this going to mean? What is going to be that better? What does it look like? And you tell yourself the story again and again, then you'll be halfway towards getting that job done. Judaism is all about repetition, and I think this is why. If you remind yourself and remind yourself and remind yourself every Shabbat that Shabbat is holy, then your Shabbat will be holy. If you remind yourself and remind yourself all the time that you cannot and you must not embarrass someone publicly, right? En lo chelek le'olam haba. He has no portion of the world. These things that we say all the time, they have an unbelievable and profound effect. So I want to ask, what is your story? What do you want to tell yourself? What do you wish that you could do or wish that you could be? What would you, if you could see the steps to go there, what would you do and what would you accomplish? And if you could see that path, then please God, you'll be blessed with the most amazing success. I want to share with you one person that I have seen who has done this, that I've witnessed has done this in their life. Now, it sounds like a crazy story. Crazy. But it's a story of a young man. And this is a young man who decides that he's going to do something crazy. And what does he decide? He's going to get married. Does that sound crazy to you? I mean, people want to get married. There's nothing crazy about that. There's nothing about that until you see this guy. I'll never forget the day that I saw him. I was at my next door neighbor's house. It was a shiva for their mother. And all of a sudden this man walks in, and as he walks in, everyone in the room turns and looks. And you could see and you could feel that the room went quiet and everyone is staring at him. And the poor man, who was blind, because he was feeling in front of him as he was walking, you could tell that he also knew that everyone was staring at him. But it wasn't just that he was blind. I didn't know at the time what it was, but his face, it had been like, had different colors, pigments all over it. And his lips were hanging down past almost like his chin. He's terribly, horribly disfigured. And I just remember I was a young boy and my mouth was hanging open. I'm staring at this man. And while I'm staring at this man, a rabbi walks up to me and taps me on the shoulder. And he says, "You see that man you're looking at? He's an unbelievable tzaddik, a righteous man." I said, "Really? What is," and I'm still staring. And he says, "This man came to me a little while ago and asked me and said, 'Rabbi, I'd like to get married.'" And he says to me, this rabbi, he says, "You know, as a rabbi, sometimes you have to make a choice." Here's a guy who it's difficult even to look at him. I mean, everyone was literally stopped in their tracks watching this man. How could someone marry them? And he said, and as a rabbi, I was stuck with this problem. Do I inspire him to go for it? Do I give him encouragement to try and find someone who would see him for more than just the skin that hangs on his face? Or should I actually maybe make him more comfortable with the reality or what the reality might be? Should I manage his expectations? And this man is clearly suffering. And he says to me, and then I found out his real story. He got caught in a house fire, and almost 90% of his body was terribly burned. And this is what you see. He lost his sight. He lost his skin. He lost his face. He says, so I told him what I thought was right. I told him, maybe not everyone is going to get married. Maybe you should find blessings in your life. Maybe you should feel happy that you were saved miraculously from this fire. And he says, and as I was trying to find the right words, the man said to me, what are you talking about? The Judaism that I was raised to believe in teaches me that anything is possible. And if God wants me to find the right person, I'm going to find her. He says, and the rabbi tells me, and he told me, I'm going to go to the kotel and I'm going to pray for 40 days. That's a very famous thing. If a person needs something, they pray 40 days in a row at the kotel, or in the 40 days in a row at the kotel, and their prayers miraculously often are heard. The rabbi says, I'm ashamed to admit that a little while later there's a knock at my door. And the man had come back and he says, Rabbi, I get a mazel tov. And the rabbi says, you what? He says, yeah, I went to Israel. I went 40 days in a row. I prayed my heart out. I cried to God that I should be able to find someone who could love me, someone who could see me. He says, and somebody did. And he pulls out a picture from his pocket. And the rabbi's telling me, and I looked at this picture, and the woman, I was expecting her to look, I don't know what, like what? Someone may be desperate to find. And he says, I looked at the picture, and the woman was beautiful. And he says, and I was half expecting, like the bottom of the picture, maybe she has some sort of physical disfigurement or something that you couldn't see in the bottom of the picture. And I said, is everything okay? She looks beautiful. Is everything all right with her? And he says, yes, Rabbi, she's wonderful, and she's beautiful, and she's talented, and she's musical. And the rabbi says, and I'm ashamed to admit, I blurted out, and I said, how? How could she marry you? And he says, Rabbi, because she was able to see past everything else and see inside, and she fell in love with a man who has a faith that won't die, a person that is eternally optimistic. She saw me, and she fell in love with me. And he says, and Rabbi, I came to this house again to tell you my good news, but also to ask you for a blessing that I should be able to have a child. And the rabbi says, and I nearly started vomiting a bit. I nearly started to throw up because I felt ill at needing to tell this man. I knew from the doctor's reports that he'd shown me that because of the fire, he wasn't able to have children. So I tried to figure out what to do, and I started to talk to him about maybe again being happy that he'd found love. And again the man told me, Rabbi, stop. I'm going back to Israel. He gets married, goes back to Israel, 40 days at the kotel. And the rabbi says a little while later, he knocks at my door and he says, Rabbi, I'm knocking at the door to ask you to be the sandak, the man that holds my baby at his brit milah. And this rabbi says to me, and he's got tears in his eyes. And he says, he wanted to honor me as a rabbi with wonderful kavod because he thought I was such a special person. He says, and meanwhile, my faith didn't begin to come close to his. You see, this rabbi, he couldn't see another story. But this man, he didn't see himself this way. His story wasn't over. He had more love to give. He had an ability to raise a child. And if he was able to do it, and if he could see himself doing it, then he was going to go and do everything in his physical power to make it happen. And that story that he'd painstakingly constructed played out exactly the way that he'd hoped. Ladies and gentlemen, paint and write beautiful stories. Because ultimately, if we follow those dreams and we see them as possibilities, then we too can experience this incredible freedom that when the Jewish people finally see themselves as capable of leaving Egypt, they do so in such a short time. May we all merit to see those things that we so desperately wish and hope for come true in such a quick fashion. And may the stories that you write become the stories that you tell to the children and to your grandchildren as the miracles that have happened in your own lives. I wish you a beautiful Shabbat, a wonderful Shabbat, a Shabbat of freedom from all the things that trap and hold us back, and an ability to be able to go from darkness to light. Shabbat Shalom. Thank you for tuning in. And if you could be bothered, please share this with people so that others can hear the wonderful messages of the Torah Parasha every week. We'd love to have everybody be a dedicated sharer. So if you could share this a little bit with people that you think might enjoy it, please go ahead and do so. Peace and love. See you next time.